Alright, I think we're streaming. Hello, hello, hello. Okay, we're going to continue on with this. I know I said I had to do something real quick. Took a little longer than I thought. But we're back and we're going to go on through this. And I intend on finishing all these studies today. I want to at least go through them. And it doesn't have to be in crazy detail or in really any. I just want to go through them where you can see what they are, you can understand the main point, what they're contributing to our knowledge, and then later you could hey, I want to expand more on that one or this one because it's there. It's all on video. The quality of the it's not like you're seeing it from my phone. You guys are getting direct feed into the PDF. So, if in the course of any of this stuff is interesting to you, just make a note of it, and then you could bring it up later to me on Twitter, and then I'll make a video on it specifically. Okay, especially for people who donate. People who donate get priority on everything. And so, for instance, if there's one of these studies and you're like, listen, I'm not big into science, but can you break it down for me? Being that you have degrees, master degree in psychology and taken many courses and done, all the stuff. Can you read it for me? And I'm like, of course, especially if you're a donor. Okay, so we left off before on the epidemiology of 5-MeO DMT, saying how it's pretty good and it's comparable to other psychedelics and its beneficial effects. So now we're looking at a study looking at MDMA users and seeing how much empathy they have on average. And the conclusions are long-term MDMA users in the sample exhibited normal psychosocial functioning in regard to empathy and social pain and higher subjective emotional empathy. This conflicts with previous suggestions that moderate long-term MDMA use caused heightened social distress and is further evidence of the safety of the drug. So let's go to the discussion real quick so we can just get the let me see what's this model here. Oh, okay. Okay, this is the procedure. Okay. So it is a self-report, but it is done in a it's controlled study though. Okay, so the current study investigating long-term effects of repeated MDMA use on empathy and the experience of social pain. So interesting to remember, although there are positive effects for long-term MDMA use on how much you feel for other people, know that they are not talking about depression, right? So it can be very well be the case that people who use MDMA long-term are more depressed on average. So just to put that on the shelf there, or not on the shelf, but put that to be regarded. You can't forget about that. So basically what they did was they came in, they took an empathy measure, they took a social pain measure, and then they took a drug assessment measure. So basically they brought a bunch of people in and asked them, what kind of drugs do you use, and and they gave them tests on empathy and social pain. And what they found was the people who take MDMA had way higher, significantly, empathy and social pain measures. The main novel finding of the study is of enhanced self-reported emotional empathy in people with reported repeated use of MDMA. This was confined to the empathetic concern scale, which suggests a greater concern for others in these individuals in these individuals compared with polydrug users who do not take MDMA. Interesting, right? Increased levels of cognitive empathy in long-term MDMA users were also observed, replicating the findings of a previous study. The current project recruited long-term but mild users, so people who used it for long periods of time, but only about 10 times in total. So, a minimum was that. So they used that at least 10 times, okay. But they consider them to be, mild users, although long-term, but mild, so. Basically people who've used a lot over the years, but not very much every single time. The current project recruited long-term, okay, in order to reflect doses that may be used in a therapeutic. So remember, this study is more informing of people who take this for therapeutic reasons than someone who takes it for party reasons. So I don't want you to think that that people who do this and abuse it on the weekends or take a lot of it on the weekends or often, that they are the ones seeing these benefits. It's not. It's the people who use it much less than that. And again, the study is geared towards people who are using it in a therapeutic setting. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's go to the next study. I could stay here for a while talking about this stuff, but I do want to get to all the studies. Let's see, what's this? Oh yeah, we went over this already, right? Yeah, we went over this already. Sorry about that. Okay, this is going to be cool. This is a Kratom Psychopharmacology article. So this article is about looking at the 8 factors for the Controlled Substance Act. So basically, they look at the Controlled Substance Act and they see that in its arguments, right, like when they first made it, they pointed to 8 things that are necessary for a drug to be there or something like that. And so they look at these 8 things in regard to Kratom, and lo and behold, they find that no, Kratom should not be scheduled. Kratom should not be illegal. It should be legal. They're saying that it's not that it's completely harmless. They're just saying that it's not harmful enough that it warrants to be made illegal, and they're holding them. They're holding this to the standard of the CSA itself, which is powerful. There have been rebuttals to this from people, but none of them longer than a page. I mean, I know that's not means anything anyway, but it's not like they did another study or something. They're saying, well, you just don't know. Kratom isn't. They talk a lot about the Kratom being different in the legal market or in the illegal market or legal gray market. Sorry, but the thing is, again, regulation can fix that. So okay. Although Kratom appears to have pharmacological properties that support some level of scheduling, if it was an approved drug, placing it into Schedule 1 and banning it creates public health problems that do not exist presently. See? So I was wrong. They're just saying, okay, maybe it could be scheduled, but not all the way. So they look at the first factor is actual and relative potential for abuse. Factor 2 is scientific evidence of its pharmacological effect. Factor 3 is the state of current scientific knowledge regarding the drug. Oh, and let me go back to the beginning real quick because I want to show you the CSA thing where it tells you. So hold on a second here. It's talking about a factor analysis. I'm trying to figure out what this is. I know what a factor analysis is. I'm just trying to figure out in this situation because I'm trying to figure out how they got the factors. Okay. In general, recommendations for listing a substance or product in one of the schedules of the CSA are ordinarily on such an 8-factor analysis. I'm trying to figure out if they did a factor analysis or just analyzing factors. One of those two. Let me see. Hold on. In response to DA, 2 months later, okay, blah, blah, blah. Withdrawing, okay. Yeah, this article, by the way, is from 2018, so it's pretty recent. All these articles are recent. They're within a year or two. Okay, where do the 8 factors first come from? I know I'm taking a while. I'm just trying to figure out where these 8 factors exactly come from. This is all for accuracy. So, like I think I was right in the beginning that these 8 factors come from the CSA. It's just for some reason I thought I read that they ran a factor analysis on the CSA, which is strange because I mean there are factor analyses kind of which are qualitative, which is pretty cool. They're not called factor analysis. They're like a factor analysis, but instead of numbers they use words. Like you could let's say if you did it with a novel, you would find like the common themes, just like you would with the numbers and stuff. But anyway, let's just move on. So actual relative potential for abuse, scientific evidence of its effect, the state of the current scientific knowledge of the drug, its history and current pattern of abuse, the scope, duration, significance of abuse. Basically, they're finding all this is insignificant to warrant it to be illegal. What, if any, risk to public health? Pretty much none, unless they find more public danger if they make it illegal. Its psychic or psychological dependence, and whether the substance, factor 8 is whether the substance is an immediate precursor of another already illegal substance, like an analog. And no, obviously no. Mitragynine and 7-HO-mitragynine are unique, which is cool. Okay, let's move on to the next study here. Oh, this one's nice. So this one's related to the one I talked about last time, which was IQ. Cannabis use doesn't affect IQ, nor does it affect you being a functional adult. So this tells us here that cannabis does not change your hippocampus. So it does not change the part of your brain they think it changes. So it says here, continued heavy cannabis use did not affect hippocampal neuroanatomical changes in early adulthood. This contrasts with prior evidence on alterations in this region in samples of older adult users. In young adults using cannabis at this level, cannabis use may not be heavy enough to affect hippocampal neurons. So people who smoke a lot of weed when they're young adults, like 18 to 24 years old, we're talking about like you smoke on average 5 days a week or more, or on average 5 days a week, right? They find these guys do not have any changes in their hippocampal structure. Now the hippocampus has to do with your memory formation. So let's see that real quick. So back up what I'm saying here. Okay. The hippocampus is a brain region with one of the highest densities of cannabinoid receptors, and maybe thus one of the reasons they're picking this region of the brain is because that's where cannabis is the most present with the receptors, and thus may be vulnerable to the effects of exposure. Hippocampal volumetric reductions have been reported in cannabis users before, but not so fast. I guess I thought they would tell you what the hippocampus does. They're not. So I'll just tell you guys what the hippocampus does. What you said? Got a moment for a 9/11 side note? No, like I want to keep tracking, but I will. And I know this is an old comment, but I will. I'll do a 9/11 one soon because I got a bunch of 9/11 studies. Just like I have these studies, I have a bunch of 9/11 studies. So we could all just do it then. If it's anything like that you think is important, just tweet to me. Just tweet to me, and I'll answer it then. But hold on, I want to see what the hippocampus. Just to let you guys know what it does again, right? It's the complex brain structure, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I told you I was right? Didn't I say it was memory? Has a major role in learning and memory. Okay, so here's a part of the brain that deals with memory and learning, and it shows that people, as they're young adults, before 18 to 24, smoke a lot of weed, do not affect that part of the brain physically. Hippocampus does not change. There's no deformation. It doesn't shrivel up. None of that. So that's great to know. It's really great to know there. Okay, let's see the next study here. Oh, this is interesting. So low dose mushrooms, right, with positive is associated with positive subjects. I'm sorry. High dose psilocybin is associated with positive subjective effects in healthy people. But that once a person does it, right, a high dose, that afterward, in order to obtain the same level of subjective benefit, that they only need to take a smaller dose later on. So the idea is that, sorry, my mouth sounded super dry. Instead of having, so basically the first time you take it, you can take, or the few times you take it first, you can take it at a high dose. So you kind of familiarize yourself with what the experience is, and you're completely engulfed in it, right? And then the next times afterward, once you kind of get what it is, you can take a smaller dose after that, and that smaller dose will be as much of a benefit to you as the larger dose. And the idea there is that smaller dose because you already know what the experience is like, so you can get a little bit of it and then kind of amplify it because you know what you're looking for. It's not like you don't know what the experience is like and you're taking a low dose and you're kind of confused, like, wait, what is this? Because you don't know. It's kind of in and out at the same time, right? So this study looked at that, and they find that high doses of psilocybin elicited subjective effects at least as strong as the lower doses and resulted in positive persisting subjective effects 30 days after, indicating that a complete mystical experience was not a prerequisite for positive outcomes. This goes again a little bit against the 5-MeO epidemiology article, right? Because it said there that at least in part, the positive effects of psychedelics come from their mystical experiences, at least in part. But this says here that no, you can get positive effects from but you don't need the mystical experiences. So this is pretty. Let's go to the discussion real quick. Or is there a nice graph for us? Or it's all tables? Tables aren't. Tables are good. I want to see some. See, look, there was no significant difference in the rate of complete mystical experiences across the 3 high doses, with 4 occurring after the first dose. So, again, if you take that first dose, at a high level, and then you take the other ones at a lower level, you get the same benefit. So, so basically the idea here is if you take mushrooms, you don't always have to take a huge dose to get a benefit. You don't have to trip your brains out. You could take a smaller dose and have a good benefit from it up to 30 days later. But also know that they're not talking about microdosing. We actually looked at an article of the benefits of microdosing yesterday from a survey, though. It wasn't it was scientific survey, but it wasn't like medical intervention. It was just people saying whether what they thought they got the benefit of microdosing from, like what they thought the benefit was. All right, let's go to the next one. This one's good. This is basically the maps. This is MDMA's road. This is MDMA's road towards legality, and this is the completion of phase 2. So when you want to make a drug, the DEA makes you go through 3 phases. The drug MDMA has already completed phase 2. It's starting phase 3 right now, and if it continues on this road, assuming it gets approved in phase 3, which it looks like it will, because it's so efficacious, as they say, it works so well. You will see it as a prescription by 2024 or something, 2023. By the middle of next decade, we will have people prescribed MDMA and taking it and using it in these settings, in therapeutic settings, legally, legitimately, and it's going to be amazing. We're going to see so many people, disorders, marriage counseling, all that stuff. It's going to be great. So what they find, real quick, is a 12-month follow-up. 76% of the people after 12 months of using, not 12 months of using straight, after 12 months after, the experience. And I think they give them, how much? 2 experiences. So they give them 2 experiences, each with a booster dose. Yeah, they give them 2 experiences. And after those 2 experiences, 12 months later, 76% of them are not meeting criteria for PTSD. That's great, because there's nothing as good as that. 76%. It's amazing, See, there's a nice little graph for us. Oh, this is what they did here. Obviously, it was randomized, double, triple blind, double blind, all that stuff. Oh, here it is. This is what I want to look at. So the vertical axis, the y-axis, deals with how much PTSD they have, the severity, the intensity, severity of their PTSD. And then the the x-axis then has to do with time, like it always should be. So you could see that with the 3 doses, right? They looked at 125 mgs, 100 mgs, and 40. And they find after those 3 sessions, baseline, so here's the baseline. This is where they are without anything. Here's the first experience. Here's the second experience. And then this is the continuation. You can see that it gets lower. That's the amazing part, right? Because here it is at this level of 50, right? So this is right after the second trip. So you would think that this would be at its lowest, and then maybe it goes up a bit as you recover from the experience. Nope. Right then, even tripping balls, basically, they are still lower later on. And the amazing thing is that all three doses were the same, basically. Look at them. They're all just around. So it really doesn't matter how much they take. Obviously, I mean, I would want to take 125 mgs, because I miss MDMA. Oh, I haven't had it in so long. Anyway, okay. Let's go to the next one. This is cool. So this is a great follow-up now. So we just saw an article on how MDMA helps with the therapy, PTSD. Now, this is how it actually does that. This is the mechanism behind it. And the mechanism, in a nutshell, is basically that it increases openness. Makes you more open. So basically, they give preliminary evidence to show that MDMA-assisted psychotherapy influences personality change, which in turn associates with improvement in PTSD symptoms. Our primary finding is that persistent changes in openness and neuroticism were found following MDMA treatment. These results provide initial support for the notion that the effect of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy extends beyond the specific PTSD symptomology and fundamentally alters personality structure, resulting in long-term persistent personality change. Got that? So they find that openness, in addition to finding that so MDMA changes your personality for the better, or it can for the better. Maybe if it's done wrong, it can do it for the worse. The present study also found that openness plays an important role in reducing PTSD symptoms. So basically, those who had the greatest increase in openness after their experiences were the ones who got the best, the most healed. So openness is the therapeutic mechanism. Also, there's decreases in neuroticism, which can also be, it's basically, that's the 2 points. Now, that, you increase openness and you decrease neuroticism. I need the latter. My openness is really high. I'm in the top 98th percentile, and I'm in the top 2% of people who have open imaginations. Although my conscientiousness is at 92% percentile, or I'm sorry, 90. I'm in the top 8% of that, but which is a weird mix. But my neuroticism is like high though. It's not as high as 90, but it's high. It's up there. It's pretty high. It's like 60, 70 maybe. I don't know, maybe 40. I don't know. But it's higher than it should be, and so I would need this therapy in order to reduce my neuroticism. Okay, so let's go to the next study. I think we covered that pretty well. Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh no, good. You could still see it. Good. Oh my God. I thought I got rid of that forever. Microdosing. More questions than answers. So this is an overview of microdosing. Another microdosing study. They found that with most anecdotal reports focus on positive experiences with microdosing, future research should also focus on the potential risks of doing so. Let's see, what else did they conclude? What's the questions? Oh, these are questions they have. Okay, so this is a study, but this is like an exploratory study. They have questions. They haven't really concluded anything. They just say, what does microdosing mean? What microdosing schedule should be used? What are the studies that have done so far? Are there any relevant studies? By the way, that's an interesting. That's good research right there, because they're asking, okay, are there studies? And then they ask, are the studies any good? See, that's good. That's having that difference. Anyway, what is pharmacology of psychedelics? Yeah, how's it work in the brain when you do it? Any difference? Is microdosing safe? Obviously it is, but maybe not. Well, physically at least. What receptors will be involved? Again, another question. What are the legal position of it? What are the regulatory issues? What are the future research needs? Obviously, more research, right? Specifically into health, though, they say. All right, cool. Let's look into the next one. Oh, this is interesting. This has to do with DMT and the pineal gland, huh? DMT and the pineal gland. It is clear that very minute concentrations of DMT have been detected in the brain, but they are not sufficient to produce psychoactive effects. So, basically what they're saying here is that there is DMT in your brain, but this idea that it causes your dreaming or anything like that, they're like, nah, not really. Because it doesn't secrete enough throughout metabolism. So they say one explanation for because if it's not, if near-death experiences, right, that you have, without the drug, aren't from DMT, because they're arguing, no, you can't accumulate. I don't really agree with that, but they're saying, according to the research, that DMT is not produced in concentration significant to activate the receptors, and there's no evidence to suggest that DMT can accumulate. I mean, maybe, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, right? I mean, that's a good point in the sense that it's true. Everyone knows that DMT doesn't accumulate, right? That's why you need the MAO inhibitor. But this idea that it can't, I don't know. Oh, Jesus Christ, look at that. I forgot about that. Having a heart attack or choking on something can activate those receptors that the 5-HT2A receptors, which is basically which all classic psychedelics activate. They, LSD, psilocybin, they all hit the 5-HT2A. And so, I guess go choke yourself if you want to trip. Asphyxia induces excessive release of the excitatory amino acid glutamate. Drugs such as ketamine, which also raise cortical glutamate, can also produce out-of-body experiences. That's true. Although the romantic notion, I love to call it romantic, that DMT is released from the pineal gland to produce altered states of consciousness at various times of stress, right, like dying, right, birth, is appealing to some, more well-studied systems provide more sound explanations for out-of-body experience. So let's see what they say with out-of-body experiences. What's glutamate? That's it? That's right. They talk about salvia here. So it's like one explanation for out-of-body experiences is that the production of dynorphin and other endogenous opioids accumulating evidence suggests that this diorphin or DYN and its kappa opioid receptor area play an important role in regulating stress responsiveness, motivation, and emotion. DYN peptides fulfill the criteria for neurotransmitters, and DYN is an extremely potent agonist with high affinity. Readers will appreciate that salvinorin A, the hallucinogenic component of Salvia divinorum, is a selective and potent agonist of the kappa opioid receptor, which is true. I've always said that for years, and I've always known for many, many, many years that that salvia is the evil twin sister of DMT, and salvia is an opioid. At the end of the day, salvia is what they call an atypical opioid. I'm sorry, an atypical psychedelic, because it's it's not hitting serotonin. It's hitting And I always thought that was weird that it would be similar to DMT, but not really. And now it's like making a little sense that maybe it's an indirect thing. Anyway. Jim Borgen's laboratory has published some rather remarkable results relevant to cardiac arrest. They have reported that cardiac arrest in rats stimulates a marked surge of global coherence of EEG signals. In addition to the increase of gamma power, a large increase of mean coherence for gamma oscillations was detected at near death. That is, mammalian brain activity becomes transiently and highly synchronized at near death. Let me say something about gamma waves, right? Okay. So I've talked before about, like, you got your beta, you got your alpha, you got your delta, and you got your theta brainwave states, right? So your deep sleep state, right, when your brain is in a state of deep sleep, your brain is not very synchronized. It's very, very unsynchronized. And it's what we would call in a delta brainwave state. This is like deep sleep. It's not even, you're not dreaming. You're just, you're basically just breathing. There's very little brain activity, as low as it can be. Then you have theta brainwave state, which is what's called like the meditative brainwave state, or the twilight brainwave state, where you're like kind of in between, right? Like like twilight, being like in between day and night. You're kind of like in between sleeping and dreaming. You're conscious, you're awake, but you're really like like in a very different state of mind than usual, right? Like I said, like this would be like if you meditated for a few hours, right? You're awake, right? You're not sleeping, but it's very different, right? And then you have alpha, which is basically the kind of state you have when you're high, or when you're kind of watching TV, or when you're eating, or when you're being entertained. You're sitting back, just watching, just not critically analyzing. You're just, just absorbing, basically. Like I said, like watching TV or being high and just hanging out. That is a brainwave state, alpha, where you're a little more suggestive, but you're definitely awake and you feel it, right? Then you have finally beta. Beta brainwave state is basically the brainwave state where when you're learning or doing like cognitively, like mentally taxing kinds of activities, like you're doing math problems, right? And they're not super easy to do, right? Like you're thinking about how to do them. That's brainwave state beta. You're not there just relaxing, right? You're not there just taking in, you're critically going with. Now, gamma, those 4 brainwave states have been known forever. Now, gamma is new, relatively. And so what they find with gamma is that it's higher in activity than beta, but that when they see like its correlations with like experience, when like I said, so I gave you correlations before with like meditative state, or beta being like math problems, or alpha being like watching TV. In the gamma brainwave state, what the point that makes it that's correlated with behavior is that you feel a sense of insight, or like an aha eureka moment. So it's correlated with like these like points that like you feel like you get the whole picture and everything like makes sense at once. And psychedelics are known for causing this kind of like kind of transcendent peak experience, right? And so they look at these rats and they see when they have the heart attack that their brain goes into gamma. But I would ask that, do we see people coming out of heart attacks, like coming from heart attacks, saying, man, I had the craziest psychedelic experience? I've seen that with epilepsy, but not with heart attacks. I've never heard anyone who's had a heart attack says they had a, besides being like that they were moved to death, like, they thought they were going to die, and that alone is, could be a psychedelic experience. But I've never seen any of them actually say that, no, they had like an actual psychedelic experience, not just a reflection on their life because they're going to die, but an actual, an actual trip. And I've never seen that. So I'm a little critical of the study, but then again, it's because I'm biased, right? Just like you said, it's a romantic notion. I want DMT to be the reason that all that stuff happens. And again, with the asphyxiation, that basically cutting off your breathing also induces that. So basically they're saying that when a person has these near-death experiences, right, these out-of-body experiences, that it's not caused by DMT, but rather it's caused by, asphyxiation, the lack of like oxygen and stuff, and that is what that then hits the receptors, the 5-H2A receptors. That the lack of asphyxia can stimulate 5-H2 receptors and dopamine and norepinephrine, and that's interesting, but like I said, I got my reservations. Let's keep going. Okay, this is a good one. By the way, I know I say that for each fucking one. Just go on with me here, okay? Because how am I not going to think they're all good? By the way, if you're a Periscope person and you're like, wow, the video is really getting choppy, just go to my YouTube. And, it's the same thing, MetaSelf. Now, if the YouTube isn't working either, just, honestly, just wait for it to be published afterward, because I've noticed that when I do publish it, it comes out pretty clear. So, like I said, I'm probably doing something wrong on my end to make it not stream smoothly, but what am I gonna do? I'm not a wizard at this. If you want to help, please send. I got my Cash App in the bio there. It's the my Cash App code is $MetaSelf, one word, METASELF, and the M and the S, right, are capital. So, again, it's in my bio, and it's in the description of the video. So, if you want to help me out, send me a few bucks, please. I could, get better equipment and all that stuff. Anyway, okay, so this study looks at all those other studies that show that cannabis use affects teen development and all this stuff. And they showed that it really wasn't weed, but it was like all these other drugs. And they did this by looking at a longitudinal study of upper middle class youth. So it's they're not even looking at they're looking at like kids who are more or less like privileged, as they say. And it's a longitudinal study. So that's a study they do over time where they look at them when they're young age, like 2-3 years old, and they look at them again and they track them through their life, and so it's very powerful. Because you're not looking at it at one point in time. You're looking at it over time, and then you could see, okay, over time, like these guys in the same area. This is related in part to the twins, like the twin study I showed yesterday, where you had the study looking at different twins, where one twin smokes a bunch of weed and one twin doesn't, and they looked at the difference in IQ and general mental functioning, and they find no difference, right? So these are powerful studies. So there is a popular hypothesis that lower socioeconomic status may explain the link between cannabis use and poor academic performance and mental health. So they looked at these upper middle class youths, and they found that effects for persistent cannabis use became non-significant after controlling for persistent alcohol and tobacco use. That's right. So basically, if a kid was using alcohol and tobacco in addition to weed, their grades went through the fucking floor, right? But if the kid was just smoking weed, his grades were not affected. And I am a living example of that, because I used to drink a lot, and I used not smoke, but I would drink a lot up until senior year almost. Halfway into junior, almost at the end of junior year is really where I stopped. Anyway, and I started smoking, but my grades were all C's, because I only did enough to pass. I just didn't care about achieving. And then once I started smoking weed and having experiences high, I started getting more into the idea of learning, and I actually became super interested in, that's what led me to get like nearly 2 master's degrees, because I keep trying to figure out what's going on and understand stuff and learn, and I like learning now. I always did like learning. It's just that weed helped me like realize that in a way where I kind of did it like, I would always, grow up watching History Channel and all that stuff, and so, it was always there. I just didn't like nurture it, so to speak, so cannabis helped that. And so my grades went up, and I went from, doing that to getting A's and being on the dean's list in college and getting into better colleges where I was, I wasn't going to get into anything. And so, in graduate school and all that. So it's, I'm definitely an example of like someone who like put their drinking down and was having a hard time with that, with their grades, and then stopped drinking but started smoking weed, and then the grades got better. So here's an actual study to show not exactly that pattern, but to show that the people who do drink and smoke weed do worse academically versus the people who just smoke weed. There's no difference in their grades between the ones who smoke weed and the ones who don't. So it's not like the people who smoke weed are any smarter. It's just there's no difference. Any nice graphs for us? I always like a graph. No? Scared the shit out of me. Forgot to put that on mute. Anyway, let's go to the next one. These are the positive effects of harm reduction and drug testing on MDMA users. So basically they look at the impact of those people in the rave who test your drugs. If you've ever been to a rave or any rave, there's some raves that have like a booth or a table there, and it's these guys who basically give out information on how to reduce the harm of ecstasy or other drugs, and give you like information on that. And so, for instance, they will test out your substances. They will, you give them like a piece of a pill that you just bought, and they will test it out for you and tell you what's in it. To the to the best, they do the same test that the cops do in the field there. The thing that they look at the color change according to dipping it in some liquid. So they find that these guys' results suggest that Molly is not a less adulterated substance, and that pill testing services are a legitimate harm reduction service that decreases the intent to consume potentially dangerous substances and may warrant consideration by legislators for legal protection, hopefully. Future research should further examine the direct effects of pill testing services and include more extensive pill testing methods, something more sophisticated than the color change liquid. This is great. The fact that they're advocating this to be legal. It should be legal because you're not supplying anyone with anything illegal. You're just preventing anyone from dying. And you're not encouraging anyone either. Because, again, the only people who would get it are people who would have gotten it already. Now there's less likely that those people would die. Especially with some of the stuff is laced with fentanyl. You want to know. You want to know what's in your stuff, man. Especially if you're a dope head. If you're doing dope, you better be testing your dope. If you do heroin and you don't test your heroin, you might as well just kill yourself now. Because, people left and right are croaking, because the heroin they get is laced with a bunch of fentanyl and their tolerance isn't too high. Although I know for some people, if their tolerance is high, fentanyl might be a good thing for them in their minds. Anyway, so again, we could see there are good benefits to this. Here are some of the things. Okay. Most of the adulterants they found were unknown. 43% of them unknown. Most of the adulterants were methadone, cathones, methamphetamine, and very few 2C compounds. I wish I had methadone. Methadone's great. Methadone's a more. It's not as pharmacologically, it releases more dopamine than it does serotonin, and it's less like magical. It's more close to amphetamine, but it's still more social than normal amphetamine. It's great because it's a little safer than regular MDMA. The cathones. There are cathones out there that will make legitimate party substances that you take orally. You take it like once a month, and it is great, and it works perfectly, and it's safe. Because it's shown you really can take MDMA more than like a few times a year. If at most, like 4 times a year at most. Maybe once a year is probably the best, But with these other ones, like methadone and the other cathones, especially methadone, they're much more tolerable. And, I'm not saying, definitely that's something to do all the time, although people have done that. But definitely once a month, they're great. They're great. They last long. You could take them, or you could also sniff them and eat them, and inject them and smoke them. But you could take them orally, which is important because you don't have to do anything. You don't have to sniff them or something. You just take it orally, and it feels the best anyway that way. At least ultimately. Okay, so let's look at the next study. This study here looks at the prevalence and basically the dynamics of how people use new kinds of psychedelics, right? So these would be all like the research chemicals, and they find that these new psychedelics, like 2CI, 2CB, 2CE, all that stuff, that they are very, very different from normal psychedelics, from your classical psychedelics, that they may hit some of the same areas of the brain in some of the same ways, but ultimately they're very different from each other. Here are some of the new ones, right? 1P LSD, These up here are the LSD analogs, the ones that are similar to LSD. These are ones that are similar to mescaline. These are ones similar to psilocybin, especially these ones. This one in particular, 4-ACO DMT, is very popular among these, and this is considered like clean mushroom. This one too, 4-ACO MET, people love this. Imagine mushrooms you could sniff, and have a shorter, quicker experience. Oh, the N-bombs. These are bad. These resemble LSD. They're these are weird because they are phenethylamines, but they don't resemble them at all. They resemble lysergamines more. It's almost like a pseudo lysergamine or a quasi one. No, pseudo or quasi. Probably quasi. Yeah, and these are all substances that are being used. Look at this. It says here that people who used novel psychedelics like those they're more likely to use other drugs besides psychedelics than those people who just use psychedelics. I mean, I know there's people who don't do anything but mushrooms and weed. Who feel like if it's not like some plant, I'm not going to do it. And so they'll do mushrooms and weed. That's it. or someone, will do mushrooms, weed, and kratom, like me. So, although, I've done other substances, though, for sure, in my past. Oh man, look at that. So they're saying that the people who do use the new kinds have more increased mental health risks. Oh, but this is the opposite for classical psychedelics. Classical psychedelics reduce your ability. So it says here that the new psychedelics, these synthetic ones, are no good when it comes to like benefits. That they're just as good as probably any other drug. Instead, the classical psychedelics, especially mushrooms, have been shown to give benefits. Now, they're not saying it's bad. They're saying that you could still use these clinically. They're just saying that there is differences. There are differences that they are not as safe. I mean, that makes sense because people have died from like 2CI. No one's ever died from LSD. People have died from 2CI or what's the other one? And the N bombs. Remember I said they were dangerous? They're dangerous because people have died. Like, there are people who take LSD and they'll take like 10 hits. That's a lot, but they're used to it. But if you bought a bunch of N bombs and you were told they're LSD and you did that, you would die. So, definitely not the same. Let me see. Let's see the income and stuff like that. Look at that. Wow, this is interesting. This is really interesting. So, of course, here are people who use classic psychedelics on the right, and here are people who use the new ones. And you can see that with the classical ones, it's pretty well distributed. This is really interesting. Look at most of the people who use classical are between 35 and 49. That's interesting. And another 25% does it between the ages of 50 and 64. That's interesting, huh? Look at this. More people over 65 do classical psychedelics than people between 18 and 25. Or between 26 and 34. That's wild, huh? Look at this. This is really interesting. For classical psychedelics, it's pretty evenly split between men and women, but women are 51% and men are 48%. So slightly, tiny bit more women use more. But when it comes to the other one, nearly 80%, 80-20 is the difference. It makes sense because that's, it's risky. Because we know, psychedelics like LSD have been around for a long time. We know the risks. We don't know the risks of these new ones, so that makes sense. Now, this is interesting. Let's look at the actual distribution of the type of race. Non-Hispanic white, 66% of all people who use it. Non-Hispanic African American, 11% of all people who use normal psychedelics. Non-Hispanic, more than one race. No, Hispanic people make up 14%. Oh, I'm proud now. 14%, baby. Yeah. We're almost 15% of all psychedelic users. That's nice. Asians are 5%. And then you see the rest there. Now, obviously, interestingly, when it comes to the novel ones, 81% for whites, but check this out, almost 10% for Hispanics. So Hispanics are still up there. We're risk takers. Let's see how many of them graduated. See, so most of the people who use psychedelics, normal ones, are either out of high school in terms of education, no college, or they got college degrees, which makes sense, right? Either the people who who've done a lot of reading, or people who have done no reading but their minds haven't been wasted. Okay, I just, that made no sense. But, it's interesting. But the most of the people using the novel ones are educated. Obviously, right? Because these are scientific things. You got to find them. Most of the people using classical psychedelics, a third of them are all rich. A good number are between $20,000 and $49,000 a year. Now, when it comes to the novel ones, though, most of the people using them make less than $20,000 a year. That's interesting. They are cheap. Let's see. Most of the people using classical psychedelics, 50%, are married. While 77% of people who use the novel psychedelics are never married. Interesting. Are these the incels? I don't know. Look at this. Engagement, self-reported engagement in risky behavior. Sometimes novel people say 38. And then it says here seldom. So yeah, this makes sense. Yeah, definitely. And then never up here. Yeah, so obviously more people who use novel psychedelics report they engage in more risky behavior than those who don't. By the way, this number up, if you're trying to figure out what this number is here, this number tells us whether the difference between these two groups is due to chance or due to the actual effect of what we're looking at. The difference between taking this and taking that. And as long as you see a bunch of zeros like this, like 0.0, it means there's a big difference between them. That the difference, it's for all of them. The difference, none of the difference. See, none of the difference is due to chance. Let me see this. Lifetime of cocaine use 16%. Classical psychedelics. 45% of them use weed. Look at this. This is amazing. Wow. 99% of the people who use novel psychedelics use weed. What happened? 99%. 99%. It's amazing. %85 use MDMA. Let's see, 13% use pain relievers on the novel side. 64% have used stimulants. 84% of them on the novel side have used cocaine. A third have used heroin. Two-thirds have used inhalants. So comparing this to the people who use psychedelics use less of other drugs on average, and only about less than half of them actually smoke weed. When you compare that to the novel drug users, the novel psychedelic drug, they are taking way more drugs. This is not surprising, really. Obviously, the age we just looked at. Oh no, this is different. Oh, this is for a lifetime. This is the interesting part. Past year suicidal thinking. See, there's a difference. Especially for past year suicide. So more of these guys who are taking new psychedelics are trying to kill themselves. So keep that in mind. Let's end it on a good note, because I'm not going to be able to finish it. But we went pretty far. We only have about 10 or 15 studies left, but I'll get the rest to them in a part 3. But let's end on a good note here. I got 3 good studies we could blast through right now. Okay. 1. Psych users commit less property crime. So if you use psychedelics, the people who use psychedelics almost, and like lifetime illicit use of almost all the substances was associated with an increased odds of past year drug distribution. Oh, obviously. Yeah. So, results were consistent with a protective effect of psilocybin for antisocial criminal behavior. So, basically, they found that people who take psilocybin are less likely to commit violent crimes. Simply put, the positive effects associated with classical psychedelic use appear to be reliable. See that? The 27% decrease odds of larceny and theft, 12% decrease odds of assault, 22% decrease odds of arrest for property crime, 18% decrease odds for past year arrests for a violent crime. So, in a nutshell, doing mushrooms and classical psychedelics in general means you're way less likely to do violent crime. Okay, let's go through this one real quick. This one's simple, intuitive. That psychedelic users, people who use psychedelics, use less opioids on average. Experience with psychedelic drugs is associated with a decreased risk of opioid abuse and dependence. Conversely, other illicit drug use history is largely associated with increased risk of opioid abuse. So, basically what we're seeing here is that if you use psychedelics and possibly some weed, you're like not immune, but you're very less likely to get involved with BS, whether it be violent crime or other like harder drugs. That could be really because of the differences between the groups of people, right? They may be the people who use this drug versus this drug may not coexist with each other. They may not hang out with each other. So, the dealers who deal LSD may be not hanging out with the people who deal everything else. And this is the end right here. This is the last study for today, and then like I said, we got another studies, and we'll take it up in a part 3. But the psychedelic use and intimate partner violence, the role of emotional regulation. So, in a nutshell, people who use couples who trip together don't beat the shit out of each other. That's basically a nutshell here. If you trip with your partner and you have nice, great psych trips, you're not very less likely to be into violence, intimate partner violence. These findings extend prior research showing a negative relationship between psychedelic use and intimate partner violence and highlight the potential role of emotional regulation. So, the idea is the more you trip, the more you're likely to be able to control your emotions, because as we all know, when you're tripping, you have to control yourself, because you're thinking, oh my God, especially like if, your first couple of times you think you're dying, because you never felt this way before. And so you got part of yourself has to be like, well, no, I'm not dying. It's just my ego is just getting deflated. I'm not dying. But that requires some kind of like step back. And if you grow that into a skill where, you take psychedelics regularly, and so you know how to kind of step back there. So it makes sense that, instead of like getting into a heated argument, you can step back because you're used to that. You know how to take a breather and not just jump into the emotion. Here's a nice little model here. Lifetime psychedelic use, intimate partner violence. Lifetime psychedelic use, difficulties with emotional regulation. This is interesting, right? Look at this. Much of a difference here. Okay? So basically, when a person has difficulties with emotional regulation, but they have difficulties with emotional regulation, but they use psychedelics, it doesn't work. You see? However, if they don't have problems with it, then it works. And by the way, the use of psychedelics is negatively correlated with difficulties in emotional regulation. So the idea here is that it seems to be that it's not just the fact that you use the drugs, it's that what is the effect? Like, why is it that using the drugs leads to this? It's because of difficulties with emotional regulation. So basically, the mechanism by which psychedelics reduce intimate partner violence is by increasing the emotional regulation of the people who use it. There you go, right? And this is lifetime psychedelic use. So this is basically a correlation between how often and how much you do psychedelics and the effect you're seeing. So the people who have tripped the most are the people who are not beating up their wives or or husbands. So that is cool. And that's where we're going to end right now because I got to eat.